Biden wants to stop misinformation on social media, but some are calling his plans censorship. Can Biden force big tech to censor Americans? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Do you ever think that there's just too much freedom of speech on social media? Well, President Biden apparently thinks there is. The Biden administration says social media companies aren't doing enough to stop misinformation, particularly misinformation about the coronavirus. That's why the Biden administration is flagging problematic posts for Facebook.
Our biggest concern here, and I frankly think it should be your biggest concern, is the number of people who are dying around the country because they're getting misinformation that is leading them to not take a vaccine. But young people, old people, kids, children, this is all a lot of them are being impacted by misinformation.
Sorry, Jen. My biggest concern on Facebook is the number of inspirational memes my aunt shares with me every day. 27. She's not motivated, she's clinically depressed. Psaki says the White House is in regular touch with social media platforms to combat the spread of misinformation, especially on vaccines.
The White House pointed to an aggressive online misinformation effort by a handful of bad actors.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation on social media platforms.
That stat comes from a report by the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which is calling on social media companies to shut down those accounts and others like them entirely.
An aggressive effort from a handful of bad actors that produce terrible content and needs to be shut down? Sounds like every event invite I've ever received from an improv team. Sorry guys, I'm busy that night. This effort against misinformation is raising a lot of alarms from conservatives, especially after Psaki said this.
You shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others for providing misinformation out there.
Which sounds like the Biden administration is saying people should be banned from multiple social media platforms if they get banned from one. Because if you're spreading misinformation about COVID, then you don't deserve to show off your dance moves on TikTok. So that's obviously raising fears of big tech censorship. The Post-Millennial, a conservative Canadian news outlet, even claims that Psaki is doubling down on Biden's plan to monitor and censor American social media. But is the Biden administration actually planning on monitoring and censoring American social media? More after the break. Welcome back. Or not, because YouTube likes to think of us as misinformation whenever we talk about things like the coronavirus. That's not true, which is why we need your support to keep America Uncovered rolling as efficiently as vaccines. All it takes is $1 per episode on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered to learn more. When Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the Biden administration is in regular touch with social media platforms, this made people a little nervous because Biden doesn't have the greatest history with touching. Yes, I went there, just like Biden. And many people don't want President Biden to touch their personal freedoms. Conservatives fear the federal government is working with private businesses, such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, to police speech in ways that it cannot do itself due to the First Amendment. The New York Post even called it tyrannical. According to the National Review, what Psaki is proposing sounds like a Ministry of Truth empowered to work closely with a major private sector political ally to stamp out information the government would prefer you not to hear. Several Republican officials are also sounding the alarm. Congressman Thomas Massie says Psaki's comments make it clear the Biden administration wants people banned for simply agreeing with the government's pre-approved narrative. That's a real slippery slope. And slippery slopes are dangerous for Biden because he can barely handle dry stares. And here's Senator Josh Hawley.
I think it's scary, Brett. I think it's really scary to have the federal government of the United States, the White House, compiling lists of people, organizations, whatever, and then going to a private company that, by the way, is a monopoly, Facebook, and saying you need to censor, you need to do something about this, you need to tell these users, these private users in a private company what they can or cannot say. I mean, I just think that this kind of coordination between big government and the big monopoly corporation, boy, that is scary stuff, and it really is censorship, Brett.
Big government and big tech being in bed together without any protection is scary, because that could lead to a big government tech baby. They're not even married. But is the federal government and big tech coordinating to suppress speech and exercise greater control over the American public? Well, their relationship is complicated. I'll explain more after the break. Welcome back. When Psaki said this,
you shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others for providing misinformation out there.
it definitely sounded like she was saying that social media companies should work together to ban users for providing misinformation. This is dangerous because if Instagram started banning users that provided misinformation, they'd have to ban everyone who posts pictures of themselves on vacation. We all know Rome doesn't look like that, Judy. You've erased 20 people from that image like some kind of Photoshop Stalin. But some are saying the Biden administration is not censoring. Technically, the government is merely suggesting that the platforms ban people who spread COVID-19 misinformation and is not requiring the platforms to do so, which would violate the First Amendment. Hey, it's not a requirement, it's just a gentle suggestion, backed by extreme pressure. But even libertarianreason.com, which is not a fan of what the government is doing, isn't calling its actions censorship. They say the federal government is not explicitly ordering tech platforms to take down content. Their dictates are essentially strongly worded suggestions. So the government is urging tech companies to censor because it doesn't have the direct power to censor thanks to the First Amendment. That'd be like if the government urged Airbnbs to quarter soldiers since it didn't have the direct power to do it because of the Third Amendment. That doesn't make me feel better. The Biden administration is really putting pressure on social media companies. But the U.S. Surgeon General says despite the pressure, tech companies still aren't doing enough.
And there have been some positive steps taken by these technology companies. Some of them have worked to try to promote accurate sources like the CDC and other medical sources. Others have tried to reduce the prevalence of false sources in search results. But what I've also said to them, publicly and privately, is that it's not enough, that we are still seeing a proliferation of misinformation online. And we know that health misinformation harms people's health. It costs them their lives.
Sounds like big government is negging big tech to try to get in bed with them. Big government, have you been reading The Pickup Artist again? Stop, it's not 2007. But President Biden outdid the Surgeon General by telling everybody what he really thinks.
What's your message to platforms like Facebook?
They're killing people. I mean, it really, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. And they're killing people.
Oof, that's harsh. Although I'm glad he called them out by name instead of vague booking or subtweeting. I'm not glad that I know what vague booking and subtweeting mean. Biden's attack on Facebook followed months of frustration inside the White House. You know who else is frustrated? Facebook. They say Biden is finger pointing at them, which is annoying because he could have just used the poke feature. Man, that thing was great. Why does no one use that anymore? Facebook also says the Biden administration has chosen to blame a handful of American social media companies for the rise in COVID cases. To be fair, the social media site Knob Slobs, where users post selfies of themselves licking doorknobs, sounds like it's at least partially to blame. Facebook also accused the White House of trying to find scapegoats for missing their vaccine goals. In short, Facebook is calling Biden fake news. And coming from Facebook, my reaction to that is, haha, wow, sad. In that order. So Facebook doesn't like Biden pushing them around. And so they're pushing back. But that doesn't mean tech companies won't ultimately listen to the government. Yes, it's not technically censorship when the Biden administration flags problematic posts for Facebook. And if Facebook decided to delete those posts based on the government's suggestions, they're allowed to do that because private companies aren't subject to the First Amendment. It only applies to the government. But that's still a really worrying development. Kind of like if Airbnb started quartering soldiers in your room. It's especially worrying since efforts by the government and tech platforms to suppress misinformation have undeniably resulted in the suppression of information that is either factual or could plausibly turn out to be factual. Like the coronavirus lab leak theory, which suddenly went from misinformation to plausible. And as the American Civil Liberties Union points out, the ACLU, no matter which party is in power, do we really want the government to decide what's true and what's false? Like the Nixon administration? Or the George W. Bush administration? Or the Obama administration? Or eventually the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson administration? You know, whenever the issue of social media censorship comes up, some people will defend it because they say that private companies have the right to censor users on their platform, even when it's essentially the new public square. And some might continue to defend that even when these tech companies are doing it at the suggestion of the US government. But you know which other country has internet censorship that's actually mostly implemented by private companies listening to the government? China. Yeah, China. Of course, Chinese authorities also directly censor the internet as well, since they don't have to worry about freedom of speech. But a lot of the internet censorship in China is self-censorship by tech companies that don't want to get on the Communist Party's bad side. Because the Chinese government is like Santa Claus. It watches you when you're sleeping, keeps a list of who's been naughty, and has morally questionable labor practices. And I don't think that's a system we want to adopt here. So what do you think about the Biden administration's fight against misinformation? Is it justified or the beginning of a very slippery slope? Let me know in the comments below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.